In this video, we're going to walk through the complete process of replacing the rear brake pads and rotors on a Ford Explorer. At the end of the video, I'll go over the full list of tools and parts that were used for this repair. You'll also find links in the description below to the components and supplies used in the video. Before working on the rear brakes of this Explorer, we first need to place the electronic parking brake system into maintenance mode. The sequence to activate this mode must be performed in the correct order. Start by turning the ignition on without starting the engine. Next, release the electronic parking brake. Once the parking brake is released, press the accelerator pedal all the way to the floor and keep it fully depressed. While holding the accelerator pedal down, press the electronic parking brake switch downward and hold it in that position as well. Now, while continuing to hold both the accelerator pedal and the parking brake switch, turn the ignition off and then back on again. You should hear the electronic parking brake motor disengage. Once that sound stops, turn the ignition off again. After that, you can release the accelerator pedal and the parking brake switch. If the procedure was done correctly, several warning messages will appear on the instrument cluster. This is normal and indicates that the brake system has successfully entered maintenance mode. At this point, the rear brake calipers can be serviced safely. Before lifting the vehicle, slightly loosen the rear wheel bolts using a 21mm socket and a breaker bar. Don't remove them completely yet, just break them loose while the wheels are still on the ground. Next, we can lift the vehicle. The Ford Explorer does not have a single rear jacking point that raises both sides at once, so we'll lift one side at a time. Before jacking the vehicle up, place wheel chocks or a block of wood behind the front wheels to prevent the vehicle from rolling. Position a hydraulic jack underneath the rear frame near the large mounting bolt located just in front of the rear suspension arms. Slowly raise that side of the vehicle until the wheel is off the ground. Once it's lifted, place a jack stand under the designated support point along the pinch weld on the sill. Carefully lower the vehicle onto the stand. Repeat the process on the opposite side so that both rear wheels are off the ground. Now remove the loosened wheel bolts completely. Take the wheel off and set it aside. With the wheel removed, we now have clear access to the brake caliper assembly. We'll begin by removing the brake caliper. Using a 10mm socket, loosen and remove the two guide pin bolts that secure the caliper to the caliper bracket. While loosening the bolts, use a 17mm wrench to hold the slide pin in place. These bolts are installed with thread locker from the factory, so they may require a bit of extra force to break them loose. This prevents the pin from spinning as you remove the bolts. Once both bolts are loose, remove them completely and set them aside. Before we can remove the caliper itself, we need to disconnect the connector for the electronic parking brake. Locate the connector on the caliper and press down on the plastic locking tab. While holding the tab, carefully pull the connector straight off. With the connector unplugged, slide the caliper straight off the rotor. Avoid letting the caliper hang by the brake hose, since this can damage the line. Instead, use an S-hook or zip ties to hang the caliper from a nearby suspension component. While positioning the caliper out of the way, make sure the rubber brake hose is not twisted or kinked. Next, we'll remove the caliper bracket. On the backside of the wheel hub, you'll find two large bracket bolts. Use an 18mm socket to remove them. These bolts are installed very tightly and also have thread locker on them, so using a breaker bar will make this step much easier. Ford recommends replacing these bolts during reassembly. However, they are not torque-to-yield fasteners, which means they can be reused as long as the threads are cleaned and new thread locker is applied. Once both bolts are removed, slide the caliper bracket off and set it aside. With the caliper and bracket out of the way, we can now remove the brake rotor. Over time, the rotor can become stuck to the hub due to rust. To free it, strike the rotor using a hammer and a block of wood. If the rotor doesn't come loose right away, spray some penetrating oil around the wheel studs and allow it to soak for a few minutes. Then repeat the tapping process until the rotor breaks free and can be removed. Once the old rotor is off, take a moment to thoroughly clean the wheel hub surface. Use a wire brush to remove any rust or dirt. The mounting surface needs to be cleaned so the new rotor sits perfectly flat against the hub. If rust is left behind, it can cause vibration under braking. After cleaning the hub, apply a very thin layer of anti-seize compound to the surface. This helps prevent the rotor from seizing to the hub again in the future. Next, we'll clean and prepare the rest of the brake hardware. Start by removing the old brake pads from the caliper bracket, followed by the old pad retaining clips. We will replace these clips with new ones that come with the new brake pads. Next, carefully pull the slide pins out of the bracket and set them aside. Using a wire brush and brake cleaner, clean the areas where the clips sit in the caliper bracket. Be careful not to damage the rubber boots around the slide pin bores. Spray the slide pins with brake cleaner and wipe them down to remove old grease and debris. Also spray brake cleaner into the slide pin bores and scrub them with a small nylon brush to remove any buildup inside. Once everything is clean, apply a light coat of brake grease to the slide pins and set them aside for the moment. On the caliper bracket, apply a thin layer of brake grease in the areas where the new clips will sit. Then install the new clips that came with your brake pads onto the bracket. Make sure the clips are fully seated in the bracket and oriented correctly with the curled edges facing outward. Now, reinstall the slide pins into the bracket, ensuring the rubber grommets seat properly. Press each pin in and out to confirm that it moves smoothly and freely. Next, we can begin reassembling the brake components on the vehicle. Before installing the new rotor, spray the rotor with brake cleaner to remove any grease or residue. Wipe it down with a clean cloth to make sure the surfaces are completely clean. Once the rotor is clean, slide it onto the wheel hub. To keep the rotor from moving while we continue working, temporarily thread on a single lug nut. This will hold the rotor securely in place during the next steps. Next, we will reinstall the caliper bracket. First, clean the threads of the bracket bolts using a wire brush to remove the old thread locker. Then, apply a small amount of fresh thread locker to each bolt. Position the bracket over the rotor and install the two bolts. Using an 18mm socket, tighten the bolts and torque them to 122 pound-feet, or 165 Newton-meters. Now we will prepare the new brake pads. Apply a small amount of brake grease to the pad ears where the pads will contact the clips we installed earlier in the caliper bracket. Be careful not to get any grease on the friction surface of the pads. Slide the pads into the bracket. Start by inserting the center portion of the pad first, then gently compress the spring clips while guiding the pad into place. Repeat the process for the second pad. To help prevent squeaks and vibrations during braking, apply a thin layer of brake grease or brake quiet to the backing plates of the pads. Before reinstalling the caliper, we need to compress the pistons. First, open the hood and locate the brake fluid reservoir under the plastic cover near the windshield. Then remove the reservoir cap to prevent pressure buildup when we compress the pistons. Check the fluid level, since compressing the pistons will cause the level to rise. If necessary, remove a small amount of fluid from the reservoir using a plastic syringe or turkey baster. Back at the caliper, place an old brake pad against the piston, and use a caliper compression tool to slowly push the piston back into the caliper housing. Compress the piston slowly and evenly. Also make sure the piston doesn't rotate while being pushed in, as this could damage the electronic parking brake mechanism. Next, clean the caliper mounting bolts with a wire brush to remove any old thread locker from the threads. Once they're clean, apply a small amount of fresh thread locker. Carefully slide the caliper over the new brake pads. As you do this, take a moment to make sure the brake hose is routed correctly and that it isn't twisted or kinked. Install the 2 caliper bolts, but don't tighten them just yet. First, we need to make sure the slide pins are positioned in the correct orientation. The upper slide pin should have the notch facing toward the rear of the vehicle, with the flat side of the pin facing toward the front. On the lower slide pin, the orientation is the opposite. The notch should face toward the front of the vehicle and the flat side should face toward the rear. Hold the guide pins in position with a 17mm wrench to prevent them from rotating and tighten the caliper bolts. Finally, torque the caliper bolts to 26 pound-feet or 35 Newton-meters, making sure the guide pins remain in their correct orientation as the bolts are tightened. Next, reconnect the electrical connector for the parking brake. Push it in until you hear it click into place. Now, remove the temporary lug nut and, before reinstalling the wheel, spray the rotor surface one last time with brake cleaner and wipe it down with a clean cloth. This removes any grease or residue left from manufacturing or handling. Rotate the rotor as you clean so the entire braking surface is covered. Now, reinstall the wheel and thread the wheel bolts on by hand until they are snug. Repeat the entire process on the other rear wheel, and when you're finished, lower the vehicle back to the ground and torque the wheel bolts to 150 pound-feet or 204 Newton-meters, tightening them in a crisscross pattern to ensure the tension is spread evenly across the wheel. Now, go back under the hood and confirm that the brake fluid level is between the minimum and maximum marks, and then reinstall the reservoir cap and the plastic cover. We can now take the brakes out of maintenance mode. First, pump the brake pedal several times until it feels firm. It may feel soft at first, but this is normal as the caliper pistons move back into position. Then turn the ignition on without starting the engine. Press and hold the accelerator pedal. Then pull up and hold the electronic parking brake switch. While holding both, press the brake pedal for at least 1 second. Release the brake pedal, but continue holding the accelerator pedal and parking brake switch. Turn the ignition off and then back on and listen as the electronic parking brake re-engages. After the sound stops, you can release the accelerator pedal and the parking brake switch. The warning message and parking brake light should disappear, indicating the system is reactivated. Finally, bed in your new brakes according to the manufacturer's instructions. This typically involves a series of stops from about 30 down to 5 miles per hour without coming to a complete stop. This process transfers a layer of pad material onto the rotor and ensures the best braking performance and pad life. Here's a quick overview of the tools and parts used in this job. You'll need a hydraulic jack and jack stands, a ratchet with 10, 18, and 21mm sockets, a breaker bar, and a torque wrench. A 17mm open-end wrench will also be needed for the guide pins. Additional tools include a caliper compression tool, or large C-clamp, an S-hook or zip ties, a wire brush, and a small nylon brush. For parts and supplies, you'll need new brake pads and rotors, high-temperature brake grease, anti-seize compound, brake quiet, thread locker, and brake cleaner. And that's it. If this video helped you out, consider giving it a like and subscribe for more DIY maintenance and repair guides. Thanks for watching.